Detroit Pistons are knocking at the door, and they are a legit threat to come out of the Eastern Conference. And yes, it's because of their young superstar Cade Cunningham, but to me, it's a blessing in disguise that he was sidelined for this point of the season, because it got a chance for others to gain confidence. Guys like Jenkins, we saw them feature Jaylen Duran more in the offense. We're never going to question the identity of the Detroit Pistons.
When the Detroit Pistons announced Cade Cunningham had suffered a collapsed lung following a collision with Wizards guard Trey Johnson and would be out indefinitely, that was supposed to be the moment their spot at the top of the East ended. So naturally, everyone wrote them off and said this team had no shot without its leading man, especially in the playoffs. But that was one of the biggest mistakes the NBA media made all season. Because while everyone was busy writing Detroit's obituary, the Pistons were out there writing everyone else's.
Side for Danis. Danis drives. Danis from the baseline. Fires, fills it! With 24.6 left. Pistons by 1. Here.
They went 8-3 without Cade, snapped the Lakers' 9-game win streak, blew out Minnesota, and clinched the #1 seed against Philly. And then welcomed Cade back with a 137-111 demolition of Milwaukee. This team was supposed to fall apart. Instead, they leveled up. Their undrafted backup point guard out of St. John's dropped 30 on the Lakers and hit the dagger, and now his own teammates are begging him to talk more trash. Their 22-year-old center put up stat lines only Isaiah Thomas has ever touched in a Pistons uniform, and Cade Cunningham, now back, sent a message that should genuinely scare the rest of the Eastern Conference. This is a breakdown of why the team everyone started to doubt is actually built exactly how championship teams are built, on defense and depth. And for the rest of the NBA that wrote the Pistons off, that's a mistake they're about to pay for. When Cade Cunningham's collapsed lung diagnosis was announced to the NBA world on March 19, it couldn't have come at a worse time. These are the final weeks of the regular season, the stretch where teams try to lock in playoff seeding, fight for home court advantage, and secure every possible tiebreaker in the standings. This is not the part of the year when you want to be without your best player for an extended stretch. And because of that, a lot of people started saying the same thing, that the Detroit Pistons wouldn't be able to sustain what they had built. And honestly, that isn't a crazy take, because Cade Cunningham is the heart of everything the Pistons do. He's averaging 24.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, and 9.9 assists. He controls the tempo, creates the offense, and dictates how this entire team operates. And the numbers back it up. With Cade on the floor, the Pistons have a plus 10.5 margin and a league-leading 121.8 offensive rating. Without him, that number drops to 111.5, which ranks near the bottom of the league. So yeah, when you lose a player averaging nearly 25 and 10 with just 14 games left in the regular season, while the Celtics and Knicks are right behind you in the standings, fighting for seeding, the expectation is simple. You start to fall apart and the #1 seed slips away, and everything you built starts to collapse. Except the Pistons didn't collapse, they just kept winning. Even without Cade, their primary creator and offensive engine. This team showed little to no real weakness. Detroit went 8-3 in those 11 games, and these weren't all easy wins either. Most of them came against legit contenders, not tanking teams or bottom feeders. They snapped a red-hot Lakers team riding a 9-game win streak, with Luka playing some of the best basketball of his life. Then blew out Minnesota, handled Toronto, and clinched the #1 seed by beating Philly.
Goes right down the middle, blocked that time. Down goes Reeves.
What a play by Thompson.
Wow.
And even the losses tell a story. 2 of them came in overtime, one against an Atlanta team that had won 14 of their last 15, and another against the league's best team in OKC, both decided by a combined 5 points. And the third loss came in a game where Detroit rested most of its starters. But this stretch for the Pistons is not a lucky one either, because over the course of the season, the Pistons are now 13-5 without Cade Cunningham. But the crazy part isn't just that they're winning, it's how they're doing it. And once you understand that, you start to see why the Pistons are the #1 seed. Because this all comes down to 2 things, defense and depth. Cade Cunningham's greatness comes from his ability to impact every inch of the floor. So replacing him was never going to be about one player stepping up. It had to be team-wide shift. And that starts on the defensive end. Without Cade's steadying presence on offense, Detroit leaned fully into its defensive identity. They're second in defensive rating, first in steals, and first in forced turnovers, and it shows. They dictate tempo, controlling the paint, and forcing opponents into uncomfortable possessions. Rotations are sharper, communication is louder, and the physicality has gone up another level. But the real question was always offense, because Cunningham is the system. He accounts for 33% of Detroit's assists this season, and no other play is even above 10%. So replacing that kind of playmaking shouldn't be easy, and yet Detroit adjusted. Instead of running everything through one player, they emphasized ball movement, less isolation, more sharing, and more players involved in creating offense. And somehow, the results are surprising. In games without Cade, the Pistons are actually averaging more assists per game. The offense became less heliocentric, less predictable, even without one of the league's best playmakers. They're also shooting slightly better. Field goal percentage increased slightly, and from three, they're nearly 2 percentage points higher without Cade on the floor. Now, it's still a small sample size, and none of this means Detroit is better without their best player. That's not reality. But what it does mean is that this stretch might have been a blessing in disguise, because the Pistons learned how to function without relying on one player. They're sharing the ball, adapting, and building habits that matter in the playoffs, especially when defenses start trapping Cade and forcing the ball out of his hands. If you had told anyone before the season that the Detroit Pistons would lose Cade Cunningham for an extended stretch, that Isaiah Stewart would miss 25 games due to injuries and suspensions, and they'd still be pushing 60 wins, they would have thought you were crazy. But that's exactly where Detroit is right now. Just 2 years ago, this was the laughingstock of the NBA, a team with no direction and no real hope. Now, they're the undisputed #1 seed in the Eastern Conference, and the wild part is, this wasn't supposed to happen. ESPN had Detroit winning 42 games and finishing 8th. Bleacher Report had them at 45. Even after a hot start, most projections still expected them to level out. No one outside of Detroit predicted this version of the Pistons, especially not with the injuries. That one-man team narrative, it's dead now, because the Pistons thrived without Cade, and in the process, they proved they're more than just names on a roster. This team is built on chemistry, patience, and work, things that don't get headlines, but win games. And now, heading into the final stretch of the season, that identity might be exactly what carries them. Because when Detroit lost its franchise star, 2 players stepped up in his absence and turned a potential disaster into a launch pad. Now, every contender needs guys who rise when the lights get brighter, and Detroit found 2 of them in just 3 weeks, starting with Danis Jenkins stepping in as the spark with Cade out. And there's no denying Jenkins has been on a tear since entering the starting lineup for an injured Cade Cunningham. On the season, Jenkins is averaging 9.5 points, 3.8 assists, and 2.3 rebounds. And while those numbers might not jump off the page, they represent a massive leap from where he was last year. Last season, he appeared in just 7 games for the Pistons, averaging 1 point, 0.4 assists, and 0.3 rebounds per game. But the real story is what he's done as a starter. In 19 starts this season, Jenkins is averaging 17.2 points, 7.4 assists, and 3.6 rebounds. And more importantly, the Pistons are 14-5 with him as the starting point guard. For an undrafted two-way player who was ineligible for last year's playoffs and had to watch the Pistons vs Knicks from his TV, spent time in the G League, and started the season fighting just to stay in the rotation, that kind of jump is massive. And to prove it wasn't a fluke, you only have to look at his performance against the Lakers. He dropped a career-high 30 points, including 6 in the final 34 seconds. A smooth step back, followed by a confident mid-range jumper to put Detroit in front and ultimately seal a 113-110 win over Los Angeles. And that was enough to show his teammates that he's got that dog in him, the kind Tobias Harris had to encourage him to show more of, even pushing him to start talking trash on the court because he could back it up. Since then, Jenkins has been more than just a fill-in. In Cade's absence, he's provided scoring, set up teammates, and played better than advertised defense. And now, he looks more than capable of handling meaningful minutes in a playoff run, because Detroit is for sure going to need it. Teams are going to trap and double Cade no matter what, and when that happens, Jenkins becomes a crucial release valve, a guard who can bring the ball up, initiate offense, and attack the rim when defenses overcommit. And the truth is, he's been underrated his entire career. which is exactly why he went undrafted in the first place, despite being one of the better players in his class. But at this point, he's becoming the Pistons' secret weapon. Not a name most casual fans know yet, but very soon they will. But perhaps the most unsurprising, yet biggest revelation since Cade Cunningham's injury has been the emergence of Jaylen Duran, who has looked like a star since becoming the first scoring option. Now, Duran's offensive game isn't technically advanced like, say, Nikola Jokic's, but the ball goes in the hoop far more than anyone questioning Duran's offense seems to realize. He's posting a career year, averaging 19.5 points and 10.6 rebounds on an elite 64.5% from the field. And in the process, he's solidified himself as one of the best frontcourt players in the league. Yet for all of that, the biggest question surrounding Duran has always been the same: whether he can truly be a reliable number 2 option on a championship-level team alongside Cade Cunningham. And with Cade sidelined over the last few weeks, Duran suddenly found himself in exactly that role, the guy tasked with carrying the offensive load his running mate left behind. And to say he's just answered the call wouldn't even give him enough credit. Duran has looked otherworldly as of late, averaging 23.8 points, 10.6 rebounds, and 3.1 assists over his last 10 games, 9 of which came without Cunningham. Since the start of February, he scored 20+ points in more games than he hasn't. Over the last 2 months, he's averaging just over 21 points per game while still shooting well above 60% from the field. He also can't be labelled a Cade Cunningham merchant. Yes, Cade makes everyone better, but in the 13 games this season without him, Duran is still averaging 22 points per game. So at this point, it's fair to say Duran has proven he can be a legit number 2 scoring option on a contender. And with the postseason looming, there's no real reason to think this doesn't carry over. His ability to get a bucket on his own is exactly what Detroit will need in the playoffs. Using old school fundamentals, physicality, and pure strength to dominate inside, Duran is an extremely difficult matchup, especially for teams without a true physical big man to throw at him. And that's exactly the kind of advantage that becomes a problem in the postseason. And with Jenkins and Duran proving they can step up when needed, the Pistons aren't a one-star team anymore. They entered the season with only one all-star caliber player, but they're heading into the playoffs with a star, a breakout big, and a fearless, hungry guard who already has a signature performance against a top-tier team. That's 3 players opposing coaches now have to game plan for, and that changes everything. The Pistons are legit dangerous. And now Cade himself is back, and if that doesn't send warning signals through the Eastern Conference, nothing will. But the biggest question with Cunningham returning was whether he would be back at 100% or if there would be any lingering effects from the injury. Because while a collapsed lung isn't a career-ending injury, it's still something that can quietly affect conditioning and stamina. And in the playoffs, even the smallest drop-off can matter. That's why all eyes were on his return against Milwaukee. And simply put, he looked good. Cunningham finished with a double-double, 13 points, 10 assists, and 5 rebounds on 6 of 11 shooting. From the eye test, there was no rust. His vision was still elite, his drives were still decisive and powerful, and there were no visible signs of fatigue after time away from the floor. Most importantly, Detroit dominated with him on the court. In 26 minutes, he was a +12, slightly above his season average of +7.8. And for a team already proving they can survive without him, the return of Cade makes them even more dangerous. But the crazy part is what Cade said about his first game back from injury. Now, stars returning from injuries usually talk about rust, conditioning, or finding their rhythm again. Cade didn't say any of that, and that should worry every team in the East. Speaking to the media for the first time in weeks after the win, his assessment of his performance was surprisingly confident. He said, "I felt really good. I felt like I got some really good cardio in today. Everything felt good. I felt like all the training and stuff I've been doing had me in a great place where I was comfortable for all of my minutes, so it was good." And what that means is simple. Cade doesn't believe his level has dropped at all. And that matters, because Detroit's ceiling is still tied directly to him. His control, vision, and late-game presence can't be replaced. In the playoffs, where the game slows down and everything turns into clutch possessions, that becomes even more important. Because in those moments, you need a dominant scorer and creator you can trust, and no one on this roster fills that role as consistently as Cade Cunningham. Detroit has shown it can survive without him, and role players have stepped up in his absence. But in the postseason, you don't survive on step-ups alone. you need your starter close. So getting Cade back healthy, sharp, and in rhythm might be the most important development of their entire season, especially with the idea that he now has fresher legs heading into the playoffs. And when you add in everything else, Isaiah Stewart has also missed extended time, but now he's back, and his defensive presence is exactly what this team needs in a playoff environment. Then there's Osar Thompson, who's been outstanding. He earned his second Defensive Player of the Month award in March, leads the league in steals and deflections, and is the only forward with 100 plus steals and 50 plus blocks, making a strong case for all defensive first team honors. Because in the playoffs, offense matters, but defense is the baseline that separates contenders from pretenders. And Detroit now has both. They have their offensive engine back in Cade, a finishing machine in Duran, and a breakout six-man in Danis Jenkins, who has proven he can create when called upon. And for opposing teams in the East, that combination is starting to look dangerous. The Pistons have lived through every emotion over the past month, from losing their franchise star to facing the possibility of a derailment, to rewriting the narrative entirely. And what looked like a potential disaster may have actually been a blessing in disguise. The role players got reps, the defensive identity hardened, and instead of falling apart, they were forged into something stronger. The Pistons organization is now gearing up for what it hopes will be its first deep playoff run in years. And considering where this franchise was just 2 seasons ago, when they lost 28 games in a row, it's hard to overstate how far they've come. Today, they're number 1 seed with a top 3 defense, a healthy star, a breakout big, and a fearless young guard. The NBA spent a month doubting them. The Pistons spent that same month answering every question. But let me know in the comments how far you think the Pistons can go in the playoffs. Are they a conference finals lock, or do they fall short? Drop your thoughts below. And as always, like and hype the video, subscribe for more NBA videos like this, and check out one of these videos on your screen now.